Hi, Lee. Welcome to our show.
Hello, Savannah. Welcome. Good to see you.
What are the vibes? What's happening at the moment?
Oh, life is full and adventuresome and plugging right along. So how about you?
You just got back from a trip from Minnesota.
Yes.
What were the vibes?
I very much enjoyed my time in Minnesota. Enjoyed getting to wander around Minneapolis a bit and learn about the great wheat capital.
Well, you sent me pictures from a factory.
The mill. Yeah, the mill capital.
Say a factory.
Yeah. A mill. A mill's a factory. But yeah, I did not know the history of the mills in Minneapolis. And they were like churning out more flour than any place on the planet in the early part of the 20th century.
Is Minnesota full of wheat fields, or was that being imported?
Minnesota and the Dakotas, apparently. And so this is about the same time that you have the expansion of the railroad, and they're bringing all of the wheat into Minneapolis from, far-flung places.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's just really enjoyed my time. The people there were lovely and very nice to me. We had a good time.
I love it, Lee.
Yeah.
Well, as of the airing of this show, I'll be 35 years old.
35.
It does feel like a threshold is being crossed.
Yeah.
Talk me through what your life looked like at 35.
Let's see. I was 2 years into being a professor.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, I probably had 3 kids by this point. And so life was very busy and very full.
Very full.
At 35, yeah. How do you anticipate 35 looking for you? What does that mean to be 35?
Lee. Well, it feels like it's starting off with a bang because I just turned in my book manuscript. So I will have published a book by the time I turn 36, which feels like a big year.
And do you have an official title yet?
Yes. It's called Every Question Jesus Asked.
Okay.
The day after my birthday, I am going to see The Killers in concert, who are my favorite band, which feels like a good omen. And I will be running a half marathon 2 weeks later.
That's a lot.
It's just like a lot of interesting mile markers.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping it's all good signs.
Yeah, that sounds great stuff. Is The Killers the one that sings Are We Human?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great song.
Lee, I actually think that if you got into their discography, you'd be interested.
Huh.
And Brandon Flowers, who is the lead singer of The Killers, is Mormon, which we're talking about Mormons today.
Yes.
But he brings in a lot of really interesting religious imagery and lyricism.
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot that kind of converges in their music that I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
But I wanted to read some reviews.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to read some reviews. Number 1 from NS88312. That's all that I have. They said, obsessed. The most thoughtful podcast about war and Bad Bunny. The subtext is truly getting me through 2026.
Well, thank you for that. Yes.
So charming. I love that review. The second one is from Anna Segas Beal, who actually is a professor at a university in North Carolina.
Okay.
I cannot remember what the university is, but she teaches New Testament. No, she teaches Old Testament.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm creating rumors. She wrote in about the MLM episode. Okay?
Oh.
She said, this whole conversation about MLMs is fascinating. I get Lee's discomfort with commodifying relationships, but I wonder if that kind of discomfort is only, and she said, I know only is dismissive about something that is so important, but I'm making a point, that it's only cultural or because of capitalism. When I was living in Papua New Guinea as a kid, in our village, there was a food store run by this guy, and then another guy opened one. Our village wasn't big enough to have demand for both, so we kind of just thought one would close down, but both stayed open, and it was because folks were patronizing both on the basis of their relationship with the owners. So she was basically saying, is there some sort of good part about the relationship thing being the driver of why people support?
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really interesting
No, I think it's a very interesting point, and I think that at its best, that's what it could be.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So do you think it's just the capitalism thing, or what do you think it is that makes it so toxic?
Well, I mean, I these days, I think of most things on a continuum rather than being categorically different. And so the monetization or commodification of relationships, if you think about that as a continuum, you could take even something like MLMs and potentially make it something that is not necessarily commodifying relationship if one does it very carefully. And And you could do that, I would think, in theory, even in the kind of capitalist, consumerist context in which we find ourselves. So, but it just takes a lot of care, I think, to
And thoughtfulness,
try to pull that off. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Well, Anna, so happy that you wrote
Thank you,
in.
Anna.
And then lastly, and this is a heavy hitter, so get ready. This is from Plingo99 about our episode on war. I don't know if it was part 1 or part 2.
Okay.
But this person says, he literally tells us to sell our cloak to buy a sword if we don't have one already. Jesus isn't a pacifist. Bold sentence. And when we were talking about this earlier, I said this person didn't mention that, like, in the next verse or the verse afterwards, the disciples say, okay, well, we have 2 swords. And Jesus says, well, that's enough. And obviously, like, 2 swords is not enough for 12 disciples to be waging war, fighting against people. And so there's also some tension there in Jesus saying, like, go buy your swords. But please, Lee, I know that you'll have a lot to say about that specific passage.
Well, just on that verse, I mean, some interpreters would say that you could translate that where it's typically translated, it is enough, of Jesus simply saying, enough of that, right? Let's stop playing these games. Let's move on. But yeah, I mean, we can all quote proof text to point out whatever we want, right? And, people will quote Jesus turning over tables in the temple as a way to say, well, he's not a pacifist. And I mean, I don't like the label pacifist anyway. What do you mean by that? The way if you look at all of this stuff in light of the whole trajectory of Scripture, what the Hebrew prophets anticipate is the coming of the peaceable kingdom of God. That's without dispute, right? And then what happens with the coming of Jesus is Jesus declares the kingdom of heaven is here. And then he calls us to a way of life that embodies the peaceableness that was expected in the coming peaceable kingdom of God. And he says, repent. That is, change the way you think about the whole world to participate in this. And then that's the way the early church interpreted it, right? So you can say Jesus wasn't a pacifist, but the early church, the leaders of the early church for 3 centuries said, we don't participate in war because Jesus teaches us X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And so I place some confidence in their interpretation of this. And there's text after text after text after text you could quote that points to this sort of love of enemies, praying for those who despitefully use you, forgiving those who despitefully wrong you, on and on and on and on. And so it's, a proof text isn't going to get us very far.
Right.
It's engaging the whole trajectory here. Now, again, as we discussed in an episode, right, I still think that the just war tradition is an honorable tradition because of the kinds of questions it's asking. It's not celebrating war. It's not celebrating this crusader type stuff. It's saying war is sometimes lamentable, but it's sometimes required, even though it's always regrettable. I receive that kind of feedback as somewhat flippant and say, this is a very serious conversation. So let's don't be flippant about it. Let's have serious conversations about what's going on.
And not miss the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
Yeah. That if there are 1 or 2, I think there probably are 2. It's this one where the sword thing and then the flipping over of tables. I think that people can point to in Jesus's life that they have used to justify some sort of violence. But in my opinion, that misses the forest for the trees when you look at the whole trajectory of his life, where he had literal endless opportunities to be violent or respond in violence and never does, and often rebukes people for doing it.
Yeah.
So I think that there is ample evidence saying that Jesus would not be super excited about flinging around swords.
Yeah.
On that note, let's start the show. Welcome to the Subtext, where we go beneath the headlines and beyond the obvious. I'm Savannah Locke.
I'm Lee C. Camp.
Hey, if you like the show, here's your official permission to gas us up. Follow, rate, and drop a review wherever you're listening now. 5 stars if you're feeling generous. We might even read it on our show. You can watch full episodes on YouTube and Spotify and stay connected on Instagram at The Subtext Show, Savannah_Locke, and Lee C. Camp. If you have thoughts or questions or hot takes, send them our way in the DMs. Lee, today, like I said earlier about Brandon Flowers, we are going to be talking about the Mormon Church.
Are we talking about the Mormon Church as such, or we're talking about something more specifically about the Mormon Church?
We're going to go all over the place. Here is why this is starting now.
Okay.
Do you know how I love the show Secret Life of Mormon Wives?
I have heard you speak of such.
Okay, so...
Which I do not understand, but go ahead, please.
Well, I've watched it since season 1.
And what would be, as someone who's never watched a single episode of The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, what would you say is the premise of said show?
It's exactly what it sounds like. It's just a bunch of Mormon wives on a reality TV show. And they're like entrepreneurs and influencers. They started this thing called Mom Talk on social media that took off during COVID and became very, very famous. And there's a show now about them.
And so The Secret Lives is just simply what is presumably unexpected about a number of Mormon wives?
Yeah, and you're just seeing behind the scenes of their lives.
Okay.
So that's how season 1 started out, right? And it's like, good. And I honestly thought it was really interesting because it was the first time I was really seeing the brass tacks of how some Mormon expressions are, including like how Mormons are not allowed to have coffee or tea because of like the caffeine, but their workaround for that is drinking a lot of soda. So there are like these fascinating religious loopholes, which by the way, everyone does in every tradition, including us. But it was just interesting seeing it like more in like a daily in and out way. So I thought that was interesting.
So just for the sake of my own education, so caffeine in sodas is permitted?
They have somehow made that a thing, yes, where it's permitted. And yeah, the lots of interesting
God bless
loopholes.
the loophole.
I know. We all have them, though.
Yeah.
Genuinely, we all do. But it's just interesting to see theirs. And so there is like an interesting aspect of that. But I have had to quit this season. I can't finish it. And I don't think I'm going to watch anymore because it's getting just a little too real, where there are several women on the show whose marriages are falling apart, who are in domestic violence disputes, whose kids are in the line of fire. And all of it is just too much. And I don't know if it's the show. I don't know if it's your influence on my life. I don't know what's going on, but literally my stomach hurt. And I was like, oh, this is my sign. I can't keep on watching. Because I was like, by me watching, I'm supporting and perpetuating the fact that these people's lives are legitimately unraveling at the seams. And the camera crews keep going. And they keep getting put on TV.
I did see one report about one particular domestic abuse situation where it was the woman abusing.
That's kind of complicated. They're mutually horrible towards each other. But in that video, yes, she threw a chair when her child was in a room. And it's all too much. But I think what's really difficult about that is that video was taken 2 years ago. And everyone knew.
Oh,
the network knew. All of the cast people knew. And they still kept on filming for the next couple of years. And that woman, her name's Taylor Frankie Paul, she was also supposed to be this season's bachelorette on ABC. And that video was released the week that the show was supposed to premiere, and ABC ended up pulling it. But in my head, I was like, you knew about that video too. They do all of that research, and I'm sure that everyone just decided for numbers and for money, it's worth it. So I had to stop watching Lee.
We're all caught up in the filthy, rotten system, right?
Right.
But then at some point, you have to make some decisions about when that being caught up in it is just too much. And it sounds like you got to the place where you thought, this is just too much.
I just thought it's too much. And for me to support is for me to participate at this point, and I can't do it. And so, that was the line for me. But anyways, that got me down a rabbit trail of just learning more about Mormons. And I thought we could talk about it. So The Secret Life of Mormon Wives is reflective of a broader cultural stroke that's happening at the moment, where Mormons have sort of dominated social media and they're also dominating television at the moment. And I wanted to know why that was. And so I started doing all of this research and found out that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints actually pay people. They have a budget and they pay influencers who are Mormon to basically help them grow their followings in order to support the Mormon Church's PR. How does that hit you?
That hits me as I feel uncomfortable with that.
Yes.
You?
Yeah, I'm a hard no. But I'm trying to figure out if there's any sort of positive that could come from it.
Well, I think that for whatever reason, it makes me think about, paying attention to psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And you could think, for example, like I remember one time when I first realized that the field of marketing paid a lot of attention to psychology, and that you could have retailers who are being coached in psychology as how to do product placement in stores so as to increase product sales.
Right.
And when I first heard that, I was pretty put out with it. And I thought, it's just, my purest self was like, what the heck, right? We're always being manipulated so people can make a buck. But I think in time, one of the things I began to realize is that we all are always paying attention to psychology. If you're a reasonably mature human being, you may not be thinking I'm thinking about psychology, but you've learned to pay attention to human psychology,
Mm-hmm.
because if we just want to communicate with somebody
Mm-hmm.
or have a relationship with somebody, have a friendship, or make a sale,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're always paying attention to psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this place at which, again, it's a continuum, right? There's a space of where any sort of prudent attention to relationship is going to pay attention to psychology.
Mm-hmm.
But then you can get to this place of where it slowly becomes manipulative and slowly begins to use the other person and to use these techniques in a way that gets them to do something that's would be opposed to their own self-interest or would be opposed to their better selves.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question then becomes, okay, well, where's that line, or where does it begin to get gray enough that we're hesitant about going further down that path? And I think similarly with things like marketing, with things like social influencers, surely we can see, surely there's some sort of space for that sort of thing. But at what point does that just become kind of yuck?
Yeah. At what point does it become yuck?
I don't know if I can specify that. But I don't know. Do you have a sense of where it becomes yuck?
Well, what it got me thinking about is, so I basically did all this research and found out that the church also has like a guy who is a reputation manager. That's what his role is called, is reputation manager for the LDS church. And presumably that's where this budget is coming out of, if I have to guess, because it's very PR oriented. So it's like, it is like product placement at the front of a grocery store. It's like, we're going to put our best and shiniest and prettiest and most alluring people at the front so that you can see like the beauty of, I think at its best of maybe what they're saying is like the beauty of the Mormon church and like all of the gifts that this kind of life can offer. But I think I am resistant to that. I feel like that's almost the inverse of how religion should grow. Like in my mind, I feel like, shouldn't it be like an organic reality where someone's life is genuinely changed? And so instead of like the outside looking in where we put the shiniest product out front, isn't there something more beautiful and compelling about like an organic process that's just true about someone's life?
Right. Yeah,
that's what hits me.
Yeah. I think the brand management language is really interesting, and I guess one of the things that I would want to say is, as I understand the New Testament with regard to the conception of the church, that the church is a community in the New Testament that lives by witness as opposed to brand management, and it's trying to bear it's trying to bear witness to something rather than manage other people's thoughts about them.
Like perceptions.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And so that reminded me, knowing that we were going to talk about this, it reminded me of a line from Thomas Merton that I went digging around for. And so let me just read this passage from Merton. I think this is from New Seeds of Contemplation, or the other Seeds book he has. He says, "A humble man can do great things with an uncommon perfection because he is no longer concerned about incidentals, like his own interests and his own reputation. And therefore he no longer needs to waste his efforts in defending them. For a humble man is not afraid of failure. In fact, he's not afraid of anything, even of himself, since perfect humility implies perfect confidence in the power of God, before whom no other power has any meaning and for whom there is no such thing as an obstacle. Humility is the surest sign of strength. I love that passage, right? And I can read that passage and know how horribly short I fall of that aspiration that Merton paints for us. But he gives us a choice there, right? Mm-hmm. And the choice that he paints for us is: are you going to be worried about what people think about you? You're going to be worried about your reputation, or is that going to be your primary concern, mm-hmm. or is your primary concern going to be that as a human being, you seek to practice humility that trusts in the power of God. And through that, you can accomplish some rather extraordinary things in the world because you're not concerned about yourself. That's what I would want to try to live into. And again, full well knowing how poorly I often do that. But I think that that's kind of the alternative in my mind, is this kind of vision of humility that Merton paints, or a brand management approach.
What do you think? Why is it humility that is the opposite of that? What is it about humility that allows us to not?
Yeah, so humility, as I understand humility, is not so much about putting myself down as it is just not thinking so much about myself. And when I stop thinking about myself so much, then why am I going to spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about the way people think about me? Right, so humility kind of frees me of that. And it's a great bondage to always be thinking about what other people are thinking about you, right? And
I wouldn't know.
And so if I can be free of that bondage, well, that's the gift and promise of humility, is a freedom from that.
Yeah. And the language of witness is interesting to use in contrast of this too. I actually wrote a piece about this a long time ago where I talked about how God doesn't need any more public relations people. God needs witnesses, but I used it in the legal sense. Like, that's what I was thinking through is, I was in a Suits phase, like watching the show Suits during COVID, and their consistent thing on the show was anytime one of their clients was in trouble, they were constantly thinking, how are we going to spin this to make sure that our client is protected? And it occurred to me because during COVID, a lot of like pastors had a bunch of issues and it was like really public. And you just saw how the churches were trying to spin it to make their pastors look okay or make their churches still look strong despite these moral failures or whatever. And it was very like a lawyer would do. And then using that in contrast to in the courtroom, how witnesses are there just to give their statements about their experience, and how there's a freedom in just being able to say, like, I'm telling you the truth and nothing but the truth, and I'm not trying to spin it. And I think it didn't occur to me until you just used that language of witness that really is the contrast here, which is not specific to the Mormon church. I think a lot of churches do this and a lot of religions do this, of when we seek to protect our reputation, we lose the organic, humble, freeing aspect of just being witness.
Yeah. And it also relates to the language about relevance. A lot of times people talk about, well, we need to be relevant to our cultural moment. And it's like, well, it all depends on what you mean by that, right? So,
yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think the way I hear some people use the word relevance, they mean you need to be talking about stuff that people have a felt need for and see this as relevant to what they are concerned about. And the reality may be that a lot of times people may not be concerned about the right thing. And so maybe the better question of relevance is by asking, are we being relevant? A healthy form of that would mean, are you saying what it is that you have to say that's true in a way that people are getting what you're saying? That's relevant. That's ultimately really relevant. They may not perceive it as relevant. And so that whole relevance thing as well is tricky there, I think.
So for you, maybe the best version of relevance would be clear communication.
Right.
Of the message.
Which people may not like what they have to hear, right? I mean, if what you're schooled in is consumerist visions of life, right? And your whole church marketing, and this is not something just about the Mormons. I mean, you have whole church growth movements
totally
that have been fashioned around marketing models, right? and having homogenous demographics that you attract to your church. And but the idea there being, if what you are schooled in is a consumerist vision of life, and then a church attracts you based upon those same kinds of desires, then what are you really going to be able to do for them when what's gotten them there are consumerist visions of life? When supposedly that we're trying to communicate a different vision of life that's much richer and more adventuresome than a consumerist vision of life. And so it's almost like you're shooting yourself in the foot in certain ways by a concern with spin, a concern for being seeker-friendly, a concern for reputation, because there are much more important things than that. Again, that's not to say that I'm never going to be concerned about reputation, but nonetheless, when I was looking for the Merton thing, I came up from this whole line from the UCLA basketball coach John Wooden, who says this. He says, "Be more concerned with your character than with your reputation, because your character is what you really are, while your reputation is merely what others think you are." All right, so it's character. That's the concern. Who we really are. That's the thing I really want to spend my time worrying about. Is there a time and place occasionally to say to someone who, say, for example, is repeating lies about me, that, hey, that's not fair, and let's talk about this, and hey, what this guy's saying about me is not true. Are there times for that? Probably.
Yeah.
But if my primary concern is always spin, then that distracts me from the more important work of character as an individual and character as a community.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of Jesus's language about whitewashed tombs. I'm not saying that they are whitewashed tombs, but just this idea of the concern being how you look on the outside, but then the inside maybe being dead. And the other thing that I think should be a concern if there are reputation managers is that what exactly are they managing? Like, what negative stories are coming out that they're managing or trying to spin? Once again, not specific to the Mormon church. This is everywhere. But it would make me think whose stories are being silenced so that the reputation can look good.
Yes. And that's a huge deal there, is that if your concern is spin, then what does that do to the most vulnerable in your midst? Right. And it seems that oftentimes what happens is that if your concern is what people outside think of you in your community, then all of a sudden people who are vulnerable, people who are victimized, all of a sudden can be getting trounced upon.
Because they become a stain on the otherwise good reputation of the church. And by church, not just church at large, but like individual churches or people or ministries. Or movements. And that makes me a little nervous too. If your reputation is king, then the dirty truth will probably not make it to see the light of day. And that makes me nervous.
Yeah.
For whoever might be suffering in that. All of this reminds me of the abuse allegations that have come out against Cesar Chavez.
Yeah, which has made me very sad.
Same. Very, very sad. Because it is for this reputation management reason that Dolores Huerta didn't come out and say anything, because she didn't want to hurt the reputation or the workers' movement that they were spearheading together. And it's just, I think, a really devastating reality. First of all, that bad things can happen anywhere in any sort of organization. And that when reputation matters more, then the truth can be silenced and real people can suffer, like Dolores for 7 decades. She hasn't said one single word until now. So yeah, I was just wondering what your take was on some of that stuff.
I think that, the little I read about what Ms. Huerta said about it, her concern seemed to be not so much for Mr. Chavez, as much as it was for the people whose rights are being trounced upon because they're farmers. And she wants to see them honored and their work receive fair compensation and so forth. And so she's not covering up her own victimization in order to protect his reputation, as opposed to keep it that potential furor over that from distracting them from a more important work that they're doing. And so I'm at one hand reticent to say anything critical of her decision that she
Oh
made,
gosh, no.
because that would just be one more person commenting on a victim's experience as a victim, and this is their
Mm-hmm.
interpretation of how they were victimized in the
Mm-hmm.
decision that they made. And so I want to leave that to her. But it nonetheless raises the issue of the ease with which a concern about reputation can cover over somebody's victimizing. It also raises the question of how does one rightfully deal with, respond to
Mm-hmm.
someone's utter failures
Yep.
in a way that tries to honor everybody, even the victimizer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the victimizers are still human beings,
Yep.
and a lot of victimizers have been victimized,
Yeah.
and that's not to excuse their victimizing in any way whatsoever. But it's the fact that we're all human beings,
Mm-hmm.
and we all have our stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then the question becomes, okay, how do you as a community rightfully process these kinds of things? And it's not always, I've been in contexts where we're trying to make judgments about how best to process some things, and it's not always obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Even when people have zero interest in covering anything up, it's not always obvious what you're
Mm-hmm.
always going to do
Mm-hmm.
and how you're going to process stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, not surprisingly, it goes back to prudence, right? And some sort of pursuit of wisdom in which you're trying to hold all the virtues together:
Mm-hmm.
justice, equity, um, and courage, and so forth. And so it's just, those are very difficult situations.
Yeah, I agree. And there is no judgment for me either on Dolores's decision. If anything, it just seems like a bigger burden that she was forced to bear while also being abused. And so the fact that she was carrying that on her shoulders at the same time is honestly horrendous. I was curious though, if I think she's accurate when she says that if she had said something at the peak of this movement, that could have affected where the movement went. So if she had come out with these bombshell allegations, like if that could have derailed the movement. And so what I'm curious about is there also something here to like the idea of like celebrityism being damaging in these movements, where if there is like a key leader or several, like maybe two or three key leaders, that can actually harm movements in the long run anyways, because if one of them has some sort of issue, then it will derail the whole movement. What do you think about how that plays a role into it?
Yes, I mean, that's always obviously a potential problem, but I think that that's often the way movements operate, is that at some point, I mean, if you look back, one of the things so interesting to say about the American Civil Rights Movement is that there were lots of leaders in the American Civil Rights Movement who were doing incredibly self-sacrificial work and had done it for decades. But when the time for that movement to flourish in the United States comes, it's Dr. King who
Mhm.
becomes the sort of embodiment of leadership of that movement
Mhm.
for whatever reasons,
Mhm.
right? And he has his own,
Mhm.
obviously, skeletons in his closet, and the FBI famously tries to leverage those as a way to blackmail him
Mhm.
and to get him to shut down,
Mhm.
and to not receive the Nobel Peace Prize and so forth. And so I think that that's just one of the realities about the way things seem to work. And
Mm.
I don't know. I'm not enough of a student of social movements to know what alternatives could look like. You can certainly have more shared leadership within, and hopefully you can find somebody who doesn't have significant skeletons in their
Yeah.
closet.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
very often movements don't kind of develop in that way, and
Or well, what do you think about it in the context of like churches? Do you
well.
feel like churches also don't develop that way? Like that's why there are these big churches is because of these key figures, and that's just how it has to be?
Well, one of the things that has been so interesting to me through the years of interviewing people for No Small Endeavor is that oftentimes this conversation will come up about the way in which, I'll put this in scare quotes, religion can become a mechanism for people not being honest and vulnerable about their brokenness.
Mm.
Whereas if you look at something like, let's say, recovery traditions, they're built upon the presumption of you've got crap,
Mm-hmm.
and the identity of the group is built around we've all got this crap,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if someone comes out and were to say, well, so and so did this crap, everybody in the room is going to say, oh yeah, he told us that when he was doing his six and 7-step stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we know that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you build a community around some sort of identity of being righteous in some way,
Mm-hmm.
then you seem to be setting yourself up for these sorts of problems.
Mm.
And so how can you be a community where there's a greater deal of vulnerability all along, and we don't shoot people when they're vulnerable? But that's oftentimes what happens in church contexts, is that when people are vulnerable, they get shot and they get shown the door. And so, of course, you're not going to go be vulnerable if you're in one of these places, because you're about to be shown the door. And so it seems to be maybe a larger systemic issue than we typically paint it. We typically seem to tell these stories about yet one more fallen Christian leader in terms of the hypocrisy of the individual. Well, that may be a significant part of it, but there also may be other significant elements, like the way the whole social community works, that makes it that we set people up for that, because we've taught them all along that you can't be vulnerable and that you can't be open about these kinds of things. So I don't know. I feel like this is a very fraught conversation, and I feel some anxiety about having the conversation.
Do you feel anxiety?
Yeah.
Oh, about what we're talking about right now?
Uh-huh.
Interesting. Why?
Because we're talking about systems that have victimized people. And so it's a fraught conversation.
Do you feel that we have that we've named that adequately? Is that what you're nervous about? That it doesn't maybe seem that way? Or
I guess part of my anxiety there is that I think I want to be, as a person, as I look at these things and interpret these things, I would want to be able to say, individuals do indeed need to be held accountable for their utter failings and the way they've harmed and hurt other people. Absolutely. We also need to be able to ask questions about the ways in which communities themselves have propped up and contributed to those dynamics and mechanisms that make this kind of thing happen repeatedly. Yes. And I guess the anxiety I feel is that by observing that second thing, I don't want people to think I'm thereby somehow minimizing or dismissing the victimization piece for which people are responsible.
The harm that real individuals have done.
Exactly, right.
Yes. But what you're saying is that in a classic Lee can't move, by the way, if anyone's been listening for long, they're going to know that you're wanting to take a step back also and saying, like, how have systems contributed to this in people? Right. And yeah. Sorry you're feeling anxiety.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
We can stop if you want. No. We can be done.
No, it's fine. It's fine to feel anxiety.
It is fine to feel anxiety. Yeah. No, and I hear you. And I don't think that those things, by the way, feel tense to me. Yeah. Like I feel like you've named both of those really beautifully. And I think that this whole conversation is a really great reminder for us to take the assessment, like going back to me stopping to watch the show or whatever. We all are participating in these systems. And is the fruit of what we're participating in good? And if not, then why do we keep on participating in it? And how can we stop or change routes or challenge it? And I think that can be true across the board.
Yeah.
Does that feel true to you?
It does feel true to me.
Well, let's go get you a Lexapro and we'll go. Great conversation, Lee.
Good conversation. Thank you, Savannah.